Welcome to the first panel for the business track for RDC 2018. This is a new thing we're trying, which should be fun and exciting. Some more focus on things like how to monetize your games better, how to get more people into playing your games, maybe why you should consider forming a company. We've also got some really cool panels on moderation and game ratings, which I highly recommend everybody attend. Both of those actually are really, really interesting. So we're going to start off today with happy players and happy profits. We're going to talk about monetization. We're going to talk about how you can very nicely encourage people in your games to spend more money, give you more money so you can DevX, and then maybe fly first class around the world like some of these guys do.
Or buy a Tesla.
Or buy a Tesla. I have a Tesla. It's this big. It's tiny. It cost me $10. It was great. And so I'm going to turn this over to Christina Shedletsky, and she's going to lead this panel.
All right. Thank you so much, Victoria. Okay, thank you all for coming to this panel. I'm really excited to chat with you guys and have you guys chat with Jeff, Alex, and Andrew. At the end of the panel, we'll probably have 5 or 10 minutes for questions. So as we get sort of close to that time, there's a microphone over there that you guys can line up behind, and we can sort of start moving on that. So I wanted to touch a little bit on the opportunity here. I feel like everybody is pretty familiar, but we'll just really quickly look at sort of how much money you can make on Roblox. You guys know that we're projecting over 70 million this year. Last year we did over 30 million, and you can see sort of the top games, the top 10 games, and this is sort of a different number than the first one because the time frame is different, but they made over 2.5 million apiece. So there's an opportunity to become a millionaire as a Roblox developer, and it's not just for one person, it's for tons of people, and it's increasing every day. And so again, even if you're in the top 100, they're averaging, $420,000. So this is more than a good living, it's a huge opportunity for you guys. And we have some monetization experts on our panel that will be able to sort of tell you their tricks and tips and sort of all the ways that they've found to help monetize the users while still having a really great user experience. So we've got, right here, we've got Andrew Bereza. He is the creator of such Roblox hits as Miner's Haven, As Your Mines, and the classic 2-player Gun Factory Tycoon. And then we have Alex Bonello, also known as Alex Neutron, and he is the creator of some smash hits like Meep City, which you saw in Dave's talk earlier, has over 1 billion visits, and also Dodgeball, another really great game. And then we have Jeff Mayer here. He's our director of analytics at Roblox, formerly head of analytics at Kabam, and he helped grow Marvel Contest of Champions into the huge hit that it is today, the biggest Marvel game ever, top 10 iOS apps consistently. So this is sort of our panel of experts. I'll start with some of the questions I have for them. Hopefully it'll cover a lot of the things you're interested in, and then as I mentioned, you can line up and sort of have a chat with them at the end of the panel. So we're just going to go straight into Q&A. And so the first one, I'll start with you, Andrew, and we can sort of pass it around, is what's the most effective thing you've done to monetize your game?
So it's a constant struggle for me, game passes versus developer products. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately because it's probably the simplest thing you can implement. The most effective developer product in my game is mystery boxes, which is probably why it's such a recurring trend in the video game industry. Whereas my second most successful is just premium currency. And my system is pretty straightforward. I give players lots of free boxes they can open, really cool stuff you can get out of them. And in return, a lot of players decide they want to buy more boxes and get more stuff. It's simple, but it's surprisingly effective.
All right, how about you?
Yeah, so in the beginning of Meep City, we were trying to get it out and release, so we put some prices down for coins. We started collecting data for it, and we saw that after 3 to 6 months, we kept on we kept collecting this data and watching how players purchase coins. And looking at the data, we changed some numbers. We looked at how what is our lowest price, what's our highest price. We mixed them around. We looked at the data, and by changing the prices, the coin to Robux ratio, we were able to double our revenue just by changing the data.
That's awesome.
Looking at data, I think that's really important.
And how about you, Jeff?
Yeah, I think the most effective thing that you can do for monetization, or that we did really, was tying events in with sales. So if you have a game where you have really cool cars for sale in that game, hold a big race, and you're going to sell a lot more cars. It makes much more sense to do monetization in context of the gameplay. If you just do it where you're like, hey, a bunch of things are on sale, you'll get some people to buy it, but that's not very fun. If you kind of tie it all together and make it a big event and everyone can participate in it, even those who aren't necessarily monetizing, it's just gonna do a lot better for you.
And Alex, you touched on analytics. And so this is something I know Jeff is passionate about as our director of analytics, and something that I'm really interested in, and I think something that everyone here could really benefit from. So what kind of things do you track in game, and how does that help you monetize better?
Well, I track a lot of stuff. I track I try to track what's the first thing a new user does. I try to track what's the last thing a user does before they leave. I try to look at that and I try to see, okay, what is the problem here? What is going on in the user experience? I ultimately believe that the better the experience, the revenue will come in because of that. So just collecting as much data as possible, I think, is significant.
That's awesome. And do you track anything in your game?
I track a lot. So I have a game analytics module that I've been working on for quite a bit, and I track every individual purchase. I track all of the flow of my currencies. So like whenever a player buys crystals, or they're awarded crystals for free, or what they individually spend it on. And it's really fun seeing the graph of how much currency is bought versus how much I give players for free. And it's nice seeing that, like, when I do a sale, the amount of currency bought spikes way above the amount earned. And it's also nice seeing individually what items are top sellers, especially when some of those items are limited and only sold on the weekends, which is something I do.
Oh, that's awesome. And Jeff?
So that's awesome. I think you guys touched on two of the most critical ones. The first one is just tracking what players buy. Who buys what is like the most basic place you can start with monetization, and you can do a ton with that information. After that, if you have a virtual currency, tracking how much you're putting into the economy versus how much you're pulling out through purchases, that can allow you to sort of put in more and be a little bit more generous or a little more stingy. Gives you a lot of control. We call that like sources and sinks analysis. That's really critical. The last piece is, sort of once you've progressed beyond that, from a monetization perspective, there's an interesting phenomenon where some things you'll put on sale, players will just only purchase if they already have the currency in their account. That's called like draining balances. But some things you'll put on sale, and it's such a compelling value proposition that they'll actually go through the payment flow, redeposit, and then go purchase from there. And there's a real material difference in between those two items. So if you looked at both those items from a pure Robux perspective, you may be getting the same amount of Robux just based on who saw the sale, but one of those items really drove deposits, and that can tell you that it was much higher in demand than the other one.
And so you guys all sort of touched upon, we track all of these kinds of analytics. I know one thing that's important is a first-time purchaser. And so I'm curious how you guys entice users to make their first purchase in your game. I know you had some thoughts on that one, Andrew.
Basically, I like to try to get the player eased into my monetization systems by giving out, tying premium rewards to gameplay. I like to think of spending money and spending prolonged amount of time in the game as interchangeable with each other, and I like to reward players for both. So players who develop login streaks, log in every day, they get rewarded premium currency and mystery boxes, but also it gets new players to see, hey, I got a box, cool, they open it, they get a cool item out of it, they're way more likely now to purchase more boxes in the future. So that's how I try to target new player purchases.
And that's even in your tutorial, right? Was that what you were saying?
It's something we're adding on, but yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. How about you? Do you have a...
Yeah, so nothing like what Andrew's done, but what I like to do is I try to put a social, something social with it. So like anytime a player buys coins, I make a big explosion of coins pop out of their heads, or if they gift someone coins, a big coin celebration happens because of that. And I think that drives players to understand like what that is. This is something new, but that's one of the first steps I've done personally to try to drive a first purchase, is just the social. I guess there's a word for it, but the social, just the people want that experience and want to share that experience too.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's really cool about that is you sort of see these coins pop above you in game, and then you're like, oh, I'm going to take a clip of this and I'm going to share it on social media, on Twitter, and then it's like, oh, this is such a cool thing that happens, right? And it sort of spreads sort of almost
Can
virally.
definitely drive more sales, or double, they'll want to purchase it again to see that experience again.
That's awesome. And I know Jeff has a lot of experience with this at Command.
Yeah, so I think the first sale is the hardest sale to get. You're trying to get people over this big psychological barrier of, I'm not the kind of person who would pay for a game, into, this is actually pretty cool. I like buying things in this game. And because of that, usually what you target in a first player's beginner sale is not necessarily making a lot of money. You want to make almost really the minimal amount of money. You give away a huge amount of reward. Obviously don't give away the whole game, but you give away a huge amount of reward so that people realize that, this is fun and it's worth putting in my credit card details. It's worth asking my parents. It's worth going through the friction of actually making a payment, which is a challenge. So I think that's the most important thing for any kind of beginner sale. Even if you have that in there and you're still encountering struggles, what Andrew kind of alluded to and what a lot of top games do is they give you a free amount of premium currency in the tutorial, like in the new player experience, and then sort of teach you how to use the store. And that's the delivery mechanism for the sort of first item you get in a game. So you come into a new game, it's a first-person shooter, and you want to get like a new gun. They would give you enough premium currency. You go through the flow of purchasing that brand new gun, and then you get it and you get to use it.
So all of you guys, it sounds like, have your own virtual currency in your game. It seems like that's pretty common on Roblox. So I guess the question I have for you is, what are the challenges and opportunities that having that virtual currency presents? I know it's good for onboarding. Are there other things that you're sort of using that for? Are there challenges you face?
So a big plus with premium currency is that you often get users to, overspend. So if there's multiple things they want to buy, they'll often buy more currency than they really need to buy that, and then they have left over, and that leftover amount can actually encourage them to buy more. But a major struggle with premium currency, it also makes transactions much faster, which is more convenient for the user. A big challenge is that you get players who have these huge coffers of premium currency, and you'll release a big update with all this premium content. You're like, hey guys, buy this. And you see that these players, oftentimes your top players, aren't actually, like Jeff said earlier, they aren't depositing any new money. They're just spending the premium currency they already had. So syncing built-up premium currency is actually one of the biggest challenges to using a premium currency system in your game.
Yeah, so I guess designing coins for Meep City, I always thought of it as like a mixture of like how tickets and Robux worked back in the day, where tickets, they were a free currency. You couldn't buy it, but you gained it. But Robux was a paid currency and still is. Like, you can only get it from buying with real money. So coins is sort of the mix of the two, because I didn't want to have two different currencies that could confuse a new player, especially young players. I also look at I also make sure that coins cannot be transferred to other users, because of the classic, games that do this, they can create money farming situations where they put all the coins into one account, or like they try to farm coins on a bunch of accounts like that. So I made sure that wasn't a thing. And I also track every way that players gain coins and every way that players lose coins. So I can see like how my virtual economy in my game functions. I can make sure that there's enough content. I can try to make sure there's enough content for long playing users who have a lot of coins to spend money in the future whenever they play. So it's just constantly monitoring how much coins are going into the economy, quote unquote. It's each user has their own, like it's not an economy, but it's the virtual currency. I wanted to make sure I could balance it out by just monitoring everything.
Yeah, it sounds like that's similar to what Jeff had said earlier, which was the sources and sinks.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a virtual currency, you have to monitor your balances. If you're not, then you run a serious risk of just way overinflating the game and kind of giving everything away for free, which is not the best strategy if you're trying to monetize. So, I mean, one of the things that I really like about virtual currencies is it gives you a lot of information about your players. Sometimes it can be easier to track, but more specifically, by looking at people's balances, you can interpret where they are in your sort of progression flow. So if you're trying to figure out, like, hey, I've got like a month of time coming up, and I'm not sure where I should put my development. Should I build more things for people to buy, or should I build a new game mode for people to play in? And though I would always generally bias towards the game mode, one of the ways you can make that decision is you can look at the balances of your top spenders. And if the people who are playing your game a lot and spending a lot in your game have very high balances of virtual currency, they've probably run out of stuff to buy. And if they've run out of stuff to buy, then you probably need to make a bunch more stuff. That's like pent-up demand, essentially. So by looking at the balances, you can make a better development decision for yourselves about where you want to focus your time and efforts. And it also works that same way, sort of all the way down. You can look at where balances are low, and that can tell you where people are, there's still a lot of content left for them to acquire.
And you guys have mentioned sort of watching the sort of the economy and all of these kinds of things. Do you guys offer, well, I know you guys do, discounts and sales, and sort of how does that impact your bottom line?
So I love doing sales, and some people do like weekend sales, or they just do sales for the sake of having sales. What I found is the best thing is to have a big event, usually tied to a national holiday, so there's already hype around it, and basically make the event super, super fun for non-paying players. Offer lots of free goodies, lots of limited edition items they can get, and then on top of that, have a massive sale of your paid content. And so you will have basically a huge burst in just both non-paying and paying users from your event itself. And then by having the sale piggyback on that, you will have a huge boost in revenue, like on top of just what would you have with the sale. So try to work sales into major events and try to focus those major events on the non-paying player.
Yeah. So for Meep City, what we try to do is, so when a big sale comes up, like a Memorial Day sale, for example, we look at what is the best-selling items in the game. We look at what is the best in this week, what is the new items that are selling the best, and we change prices accordingly during the sale. So we don't put everything on sale. We look at what's popular, what's in demand. And when we do that, like we definitely see like huge growth in revenue just for that sale. But it's definitely like I like that idea that it is something that's rare enough that like I don't want it to be too common where it'll have to balance out like how often I would do a sale.
Yeah, that's really smart. You don't want people to get conditioned to expecting sales, because at that point they're just going to sort of hold back on their spending, and it becomes really hard to figure out what people actually like versus what they're just buying because it's on sale. I think of sales as an important part of like the merchandising sort of life cycle. If you think about it from a traditional like retailer's perspective, you come out with a new pair of shoes, brand new Nikes or whatever it is, and they're full price when they come out. And people who really want them, they can buy them at full price. And then over time, people who are like, I really like Nike, but I don't like these, $500 sneakers or whatever, maybe I'll buy them in like a month or two when they go on sale. And the sales get progressively sort of better over time. So it's a way to give people access to your content who are a little on the fence. Everyone in your game will usually look at something and say, I would pay either full price for that or somewhere less than full price. So doing sales allows you to give access to that content, especially if you know that you have more content coming, right? Like put a lot of Nikes on sales when the new version is coming out, or like if you have a bunch more things coming into your game, whatever they are, try to discount the old content so that more people get a chance to experience it and play around with it.
Yeah, just tagging on to that, this is sort of related. I'm curious about, do you guys create like special content for the sales? Is it something where it's like, oh, this is only available during this time or that kind of thing?
So this is something I'm really excited to talk about. In Miners Haven, I do lots of seasonal events, and sometimes I'll have game passes go on sale, but those are always purchasable. One of the biggest things that players look forward to in my events are limited edition seasonal items that the shtick is they go on sale during the event, or they're obtainable during the event, but not directly purchasable, and then that's it. At the end of the event, those who have them forever. Those who don't have it, that's it. And so that creates massive, just enormous demand for these items. And it makes the people who own them really proud just to show them off on their base, even if they eventually become useless as the game's meta progresses. Just having these super rare items, super limited edition items, is a big thing for people. And there are a lot of people who are willing to spend a lot or invest a lot of time into the game in order to get these. And some advice that I always gave a friend of mine while I was working with him, is that don't be afraid to give stuff away for free. I will sometimes see a player opens up their first regular mystery box and they unbox a super rare limited edition item that someone else might have spent like $20 trying to get. And to a developer, that might seem scary, like, oh my god, I just gave something super rare away for free. But that's really not how it works, because that player is now way more likely to spend, and they're super invested in your game now that they have that super rare item. So don't be afraid to give stuff away for free, and limited edition items are really powerful.
Yeah, see, I'm learning stuff personally, personally, I've never tried to make new content for a sale. Sales usually come out of nowhere for me. Oh, let's do this week and for this holiday. So we just plan for that week, and while we're also working on new content, but personally, never added new content for a sale.
Yeah, limited edition content that's great. It takes extra time, so you have to make sure that you get sort of the full value out of that. But it's a fantastic idea.
Yeah, that's something that we do. If you guys are familiar with the Roblox catalog, I assume you all are. That's something that we do a lot there, the limited edition sort of items, and it's pretty successful if you can only get them for a certain amount of time, something like that. And then something you guys have already touched on a little bit that I'm interested in hearing more about because it's so important to us, I think, as a platform that's like friendly for all of our users, is how do you guys balance gameplay versus monetization? I know that that's a challenge in terms of your time, but also like in terms of like sort of your players.
It's a really big challenge, and something I've heard from people before is that non-paying players, there's a saying, if you're not paying for it, then you're the product. And in free-to-play games, oftentimes the non-paying players are the product for the paying players. Oftentimes the paying players are paying for a unique experience or just bragging rights. And so in a lot of ways, you can think of non-paying players as content for the paying players. And so if you think about it that way, it's really important to build content for your non-paying players. So when you want to release an update for your game, you want to focus not just on the people who pay, but also you want to make a really nice, rewarding experience, because even players who never pay for your game can contribute and can indirectly increase your revenue.
Yeah. So personally, I've always I like to think of my game in 4 steps. So revenue being the last step. Otherwise, I like to focus on retention, playtime, and optimization. And I feel that those 3 things, if they're done well, revenue will come because of that. So while those 3 things are something I focused on a lot in the past year and a half in my game, monetization is something I'm starting to get back into. Just because those 3 things are at a nice level for me that I'm comfortable with before I can focus on revenue. That's what I like to think of it as I like to go back and make sure everything's working well before I work on revenue. But I believe that those 3 things will bring revenue in because of how well they're done.
So I don't think they're sort of as separate as we often treat them. I think of monetization more as just a part of the gameplay. It is a way to play the game. Having said that, people generally spend money on what they spend their time on. You can think about any sort of really obscure hobby. I used the example earlier with some people about like model trains. And then there's like a news story that comes out once every 6 months about these people who just spend ludicrous amounts of money on whatever X obscure hobby. And it's because they spend a lot of time on it. It's the same thing with like sports teams. Why do people buy jerseys for tons of money or pay tons of money to go to live sporting events? It's because they spend a lot of time consuming that content and talking about it with their friends. It's the same thing with games and virtual economies. If you have a game that people are spending a lot of time in and are really enjoying, then they are going to be more than happy to invest their money into that. That's why free-to-play games really work. So from that perspective, I would sort of always bias towards building a great game first. You want to build that great game. You just don't want to build it necessarily separate from monetization. I think that's the really key piece, is that people who come into your game and are really enjoying it, if they can't customize their character, then they can't really engage with your game on the same level. You see a game like Fortnite, where you're sort of customizing all this really cool stuff about your character. That's a way that they play the game. That's not a separate monetization strategy that they tacked on later. This is like a way to experience Fortnite content. So kind of think of your games the same way.
If I could just add on, for me at least, the paying players and the non-paying players, I like to view them as just separate ways of experiencing the game. And of course the goal is always to convert non-paying players over to paying players, but there's a balance of like how much more fun is the paying route than the non-paying route to encourage people to pay, but also how fun is the non-paying route to encourage people to play in the first place. And so there's a balance, and it, at least to me, is useful viewing the non-paying player experience and the paying player experience whenever I release new content, because even though the end goal is to convert all non-paying players to paying players, they are different gameplay experiences, and it's important to balance them carefully.
Okay, so the next question I have for you is about failure. So have you ever tried a monetization technique or sort of a new game thing and had it not work out? And sort of did you learn anything from that? Was there any?
Yeah, I had lots of failures actually. My probably most well-known one is War Games. I saw Lolaris made a game called Mad Games or something. I was like, oh, whoa, mini games are the next big thing. I wanted to hop on it. And I sort of rushed the project a bit, and I focused way too heavily on monetization and retention and just business strategies that I forgot to make a fun game. And then with Azure Minds, I sort of did the opposite. I made a fun hobby game, and I forgot to monetize it. So definitely messed up on both ends. But you learn every time you mess up. So I don't think of messing up as a negative thing. I think of it as a learning experience.
Yeah. So for Meep City, starter packs. That was something you saw in a lot of games. So I felt like a social game like Meep City, like a game with a currency and like items you can buy, like that would be great to have a starter pack. I've tried it 2 times. I've tried with different prices, different items, like the style. I try to make it pretty. I want to make them want to buy it, but it never worked. It didn't perform as well as anything else in the game. I've done this twice. 2 times. So each time it didn't differ. It didn't perform well. So what I decided to do is I know I want to get back to it, but because because it didn't perform well, it's this pop-up that comes up for new players. It's not a good user experience, so I got rid of it completely just because it's not a good user experience. Even if it brought in a decent amount of revenue, I felt that the user experience was worth more than that stupid pop-up that would come up every time they played. So it's something I'm still investigating and looking into, but that was something like you have to be able to decide like, this isn't working, it's not performing well. I can do this better, but for now I'm going to get rid of it and try again later.
Yeah, I think a lot of the failures I've had have been around really 2 themes. The first one is pricing. Pricing is really hard to get right, and I hear that from a lot of devs. It's almost the most common question I get from people at Roblox is like, hey, I'm thinking about selling something in my game. How much should it be? And in reality, there is no right answer to that question, and I think the only way you can recover from it is to say that pricing is going to be something that we change, something that I want to get right. You can start it high, you can start it low, you can look at other items in your game, similar games. At the end of the day, there's no formula for it. You can just kind of try your best, and you just look at it and say, all right, if a lot of people aren't buying it and I'm tracking what people are buying, I expected this to be more in demand. I can lower the price. Oh, looks like way more people bought this item. All right, well, when I come out with another version of it or a better version of it, I'll make the next one a little bit more expensive. So I think a lot of the failures is really just about, and I love the point Bereza just made about not really thinking of it as a failure, but a learning experience, because there is you will never get pricing right, I promise, especially not on the first try. And then the second piece is just this is going to sound incredibly simple, but I've made a lot of things that nobody wanted to buy. And the way you get into that trap is by not looking at the analytics where people are spending time in your game. So there are a lot of games, the games that I've worked on in the past have been fairly complex. So there's certain, players will play PvP more, or they'll play, the single player mode more, or whatever it is. And if you don't look at where your players are spending their time, and you put a bunch of new items in an area where they're not spending their time in their game, unsurprisingly, they're not going to buy stuff.
So I have a question based on your answer, Jeff, that I'm always interested in is if you start, is it easier to start high and then reduce the price? Or is it easier to start low and increase the price? Maybe they're equally difficult challenges.
It's, oh God. So
I put him on the spot
it's
here.
It's really complicated. In general, if you start low and then you go higher, what you're doing is you're taking content away from people. You had a bunch of people who could afford to buy it before, and now they can't. And that's how you get an upset community. That's only my experience based on the free-to-play games that I worked on. It's really about your users and who your community is. And that's why, just as in monetization, as in everything else, it is super critical to understand what your users are like, who they are, and sort of how they play the game. Because that answer may have been true for me always, and it may be really not the same for the kind of people who play your games. But that's the general approach that I take.
All right, and then do you guys have any advice you could offer to new developers, so developers who are just sort of thinking about their first game or monetizing their game for the first time? Is there a place they can start? Is it different for every game?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of great advice has already been given, but I just really like the idea of looking at it as paying players and non-paying players and giving them both really awesome, unique experiences. But basically just set out to make an awesome game that people enjoy playing and then think, if I'm this kid playing this game, what's something that I would really want to buy, but that's not like something that people would be really upset about to the point where, like, you don't want to sell content or put content behind a paywall that's crucial or a big part of your game, because then a lot of players will be upset. So you got to ask yourself, what do people really want to buy, but they wouldn't be too upset not having? And that's sort of the best philosophy you can use when trying to figure out what to sell in your game.
Yeah. So for me, like, I try not. So for me, I think that you shouldn't 100% focus on monetization at the beginning. I think you need to have the plan and what you plan to do, but you shouldn't focus on it, because adding it at the end of the game won't work. You shouldn't try to put it on top of what you made. It should be built in with the game. So you should always plan it out and collect data, change prices if you have to. Like, those are the basic steps. But a lot of mistakes that are made is that trying to add you make a game and then you try to add monetization on top of that. It doesn't work well. It's got to be planned out. And you give yourself steps on what you want to do.
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give people is just get started. Just get a store in the game and start playing around. You will not get this right on the first try. Just iterate on it. And that's I think, the most critical sort of first step. If you're sort of already beyond that, look around at other top games on Roblox. A lot of people have faced the same problems and same questions that you have before, and the user bases won't be exactly the same. Same kind of person that plays Meep City may not be exactly the same person that plays Phantom Forces. But that's okay. They're still all Robloxians, and they all will be at least close enough for you to draw some interesting examples. If you just look at the top games, you pick out the best monetization systems, and you try to duplicate those in your game and make them fit in context, right? You want it to sort of flow with your gameplay. That's a ton of work right there. That's 6 months of work at least. You want to progress beyond that, look at the top free-to-play games. Supercell has been figuring this out for forever. They make billions of dollars on their monetization systems. Why do those monetizations work so well in their games? What are the mechanisms of monetization that they're using? And what are the ones that they're choosing not to use? I think if you just sort of study the people who are already really, really good at this, you can go pretty much all the way.
All right, and then one of the ones, and these I understand will be like specific to your games, but have you found that any type of item is a bestseller? So is it character customization kind of items? Is it power-ups? Is it things that are mostly cosmetic, or is it things that improve the game? Have you had success with like a pay-to-win model? Like, what are the things that really sell for you?
Well, in my game, and this is probably not a universal rule, it's probably because of the way that I onboard new players, but like I said earlier, mystery boxes are consistently my top-selling product. It really depends on how you build your game, because at the end of the day, I'm not selling mystery boxes, I'm selling the items behind the mystery boxes. So the very first step in monetization is just figuring out what it is you're going to sell, not who you're going to sell it to, what price, but just what part of your game you're selling. Yeah, that's
So
sort of how I like to think about it.
What's in the mystery boxes?
What's in the mystery boxes is limited edition items for seasonal events, and then just super rare items that are always inside boxes. But it's not just the idea of scarcity. These are really cool items most of the time. So it's just a combination of items that someone who's into the game would really like to use because they have a unique attribute, and also the fact that they're limited edition and players really want them. But at the same time, it's not crucial to the gameplay experience. In no way are these super cool items required to play through the game and obtain some of the other super cool items you can get in the game. It's just sort of an add-on that's not really crucial, but really awesome to have.
Yeah, so for Meep City, it's definitely coins are our biggest seller, but it also seems that people who buy the Plus membership, like we're thinking of like ways of changing that. We're thinking of like, oh, how would it work if it were a subscription model? so that's also something we're looking into, because we believe that that whole plus system could be improved, because I believe that coins shouldn't be the top seller. I believe that it should be like anything else. But right now because monetization hasn't been my focus. So like I said, like I was experimenting with a starter pack, and that didn't work well. So I'm still experimenting.
So I think the best, loot boxes are obviously amazing. There's a reason everybody does them. And I think the reason is not necessarily because they make a ton of money. They make a ton of money because they're a lot of fun. There are people who come into games and just love spinning loot boxes. The idea that something is cool because it's rare exists in a virtual space just like it exists in real life. So having rare items in your game makes it fun to keep playing. And I think that one of the most interesting things when we looked at data across all different games in past places I've worked, as well as at Roblox, is that pretty much universally, if someone gets everything in a game, they get all the achievements, all of the gear, everything like that, they really don't play for very much longer because there's nothing really for them to do. So having that scarcity is really critical. If you want to do that scarcity through a loot box, that's great. There are other ways to do it too. And I think the best monetizing games are able to sort of hit all of them, where you have some things are direct purchase, some things are loot boxes, some things have to be earned, some things are subscription. Like, there's a different kind of consumer that wants each of those different products, and if you can have all of them integrated in a really cool way in your game so that everybody kind of gets a chance to acquire items in the way that makes the most sense for them, then you're done.
All right, and I think now we have a couple minutes for questions. So if anybody has questions, sort of head over there, line up right there by Victoria.
Yeah.
She'll be able to take your questions and.
Hello, I'm a big fan of all your games. I just want to mention that first. So you mentioned multiple times about collecting data for your games. What do you mean by that? Do you guys look at what is given by Roblox? Do you have your own plugins? Do you have things in the game that you code that say, okay, this is what they're buying from things you've hard-coded yourself? I just want to get on this board of monetization, but I'm not sure how to collect data in the most efficient and easy way.
I guess I can hop on that one. I know Alex takes really in-depth data, but the method he uses might not be the best for everyone because it's pretty hard to set up. I use game analytics. It's a service. It's a free service. There are about 3 major game analytics modules on Roblox. Mine's one of them. It's actually probably not the best. There's a newer one that's out. You plop it into your game. You sign up on game analytics. You put in your username, password. They give you a key. You throw the key into your game. All in all, it takes about an hour, and all of a sudden you have retention statistics. You have new users versus returning users. You have average play times for those groups of players, and if you get a little bit more involved, you can start tracking individual sales. So to everyone in the room, I 100% recommend using the service. It's completely free. The shtick is that they anonymize your data and sell it to data miners, which I think is a pretty fair trade-off. But yeah, it takes like an hour to set up. I fully recommend it because it just gives you all the data you need to see, and you can keep improving it and fine-tuning it and adding custom events even to your game to really track whatever it is you want to track.
Thank you.
I wanted to talk about morality in monetization. Like a big issue for me was that when I added a game pass or something that, it unlocked levels or something, players would just be mad at me just because they couldn't play the full game. So I wanted to get your guys' opinions or advice that, based on that situation.
So you as a developer, you should be allowed to make money. You shouldn't feel bad for adding content to monetize from. I do believe that that players should be also, for content like that, like if you're going to unlock a world, I do believe that players should be able to earn that kind of content. But there definitely can be content that you can add that definitely you have to pay money for. But if it's for stuff that like expands the world or it unlocks a whole nother thing, I do think that it should be earnable as well as purchasable, because there are definitely players out there who will just want to play your new Candyland world. You need to be able to let them get in immediately, or they have to work for it. You shouldn't feel bad for adding anything to your game that makes money. Like it is your time and your effort. It is your profession, and it is your profession because you make money from it. So you shouldn't feel bad for that. There are definitely always going to be players who complain, especially if someone's like you who's never really added anything. Like all of a sudden you add something and your fans get upset. Yeah. That'll come and go all the time. The players who are upset about that are way a small percentage than the players who don't mind. But as long as it's they can work for it, for something like that, as long as they can work for it, you shouldn't feel bad for that.
If I could add just a tiny bit of advice, instead of monetizing parts of your world, which is something I'd consider very high risk, try to start out monetizing low risk content like cosmetics that players don't really care about that much, and then you can see what works, what doesn't work, and then maybe try expanding to riskier fields. Because you're starting off something that's really risky, monetizing just a giant chunk of your game, that's bound to anger some people. Try monetizing smaller things and seeing how that works.
I wanted to ask about in places like Hawaii and China, they're adding more regulations on loot boxes. Like Hawaii, they're thinking about equating it to gambling. China already enforces stuff like you have to reveal your statistics, something about not being able to buy loot boxes directly with real money. How is that impacting monetization? Roblox isn't enforcing any rules on that yet, but maybe in the worst case scenario, where do you feel the loot box model could go on Roblox and in terms of monetization?
Well, I'm actually probably one of the players who's on the fence about loot boxes. In Overwatch, for example, I buy tons of loot boxes. If I could go through and do it all again, I don't think I'd use loot boxes as my vehicle. They're a great vehicle because they're fairly easy to set up and they're super rewarding to use. But that impact of just the people pushing against that type of monetization, I don't think it's just loot boxes. I think players are just getting sick of really aggressive monetization strategies and exploitative monetization strategies. That wave actually hasn't really hit Roblox yet. I feel like it's coming, which is why in my next project I don't think I'm going to do loot boxes. I don't know. I don't know what to recommend. Loot boxes are good for some cases and bad for other cases. So it really is depending on your game. You just need to consider what you think is morally right and how you think your players will feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think publishing loot box percentages, they're the percentages of items in loot boxes, hasn't seemed to hurt gaming revenue. Because people know that the items are rare. So they're like, yeah, I knew this was going to be hard in the first place, but it's still fun, right? I agree that the backlash hasn't really hit Roblox yet. But I think the really key point that I would agree with Andrew is that what players are sick of is aggressive monetization. Loot boxes can be a really fun mechanism to do monetization that doesn't have to necessarily be aggressive. Where you draw that line is really up to you guys.
Thank you.
Hi, I have a quick question regarding how you can get new players to make purchases. So when I did a soft launch or a beta of my game, I believe it was last summer, we have mostly cosmetic items in our shop, such as pets, particles, trails, name tags, etc. Well, players were they just weren't opening the shop that often. And they just weren't utilizing, the massive market that we have in our game. How would you be able to basically get them to open the shop, and, explore the market and say, hey, this is actually really cool. I have something that nobody else has and it's cosmetic. How would you?
For my gaming, for example, the shop is such an integrity. You have to open it to really engage in the game. So as long as you can find a way, you have to. So you built this great shop, but you can't be afraid to throw it away and start again. I think you shouldn't. If it's not working, you should look at it, find what the problems are, and start over. So it has to be fundamental. They should open the shop within the first 5 minutes, kind of thing. I don't know.
You could maybe do that with a tutorial, right? So you could have a tutorial where you give them a bit of free currency and say, hey, go buy your first item in the shop. And then they can sort of pick something out, and then they've opened the shop and they've got a taste of sort of what this customization looks like. I think there's a bunch of really cool things that you could do around that. So look at if the shop works for you, but it seems like just sending them to the shop as sort of a first part of a tutorial might be really helpful.
All right, thank you.
All right, we have time for one more question.
I just wanted to know your thoughts and opinions on paid access, whether it be having paid access for a game in its alpha and beta stage and then releasing the game free when it's finished to have actual legitimate players, give constructive feedback because they're invested into the game, or just having the game outright paid access forever. And there are some games that are paid access that are in the top earning page. So I just wanted your thoughts and opinions.
That's a great question. I'm actually for paid access. I think it's no secret that the game that's been top earning, it's like no one really talks about it as much as they should. Jailbreak's not number one on top earning. It hasn't been number one on top earning for a while. It's Welcome to Bloxburg, and that game cost 25 Robux to play. I think that's a very interesting case study, and for my personal project that I'm releasing in 5 months or so, I'm launching with paid access, and I might stay paid access because something that was said earlier is that the biggest thing is getting the player to make their first purchase. Well, if the first purchase is deciding to play the game, that's something you've already gotten out of the way. And Welcome to Bloxburg has no problem pulling in players. It costs 25 Robux to play, but they're still on the front page. I think that it's an underutilized tool, and I definitely think that developers should pay more attention to it, not just for early access, but potentially what happens when you have paid access, you have a higher concentration of players who are willing to pay, and that can lead to them influencing each other to make more payments, for example. But there's just a lot of other things. If you make a really good game, people are just generally willing to pay for it. So I'm definitely huge on paid access, and I think it's definitely worth trying out.
So I like to believe that paid access can be a little bit controversial. There are different ways to look at it. So like Bloxburg and like your game in the future, like that's okay for that kind of model. But I also believe that the whole model of like making it paid first before making it free, you shouldn't do that. Personally, I believe that because you are going to only see players who have Robux play your game. You won't see the actual audience who will play your game. I believe that the game should always be open. Players should be coming in naturally and trying your game, even if it's not released, just to see what's working and what isn't. Because if you have a paid-only system, it's going to, your vision of like what they do is going to be tainted because you won't see what the actual free players will play your game. I also think that free-to-play is such a growing market. Like games that used to be, subscription only, or you had to pay to play it in the first place. Like those are dying. I also think that that is a model that is slowly dying because Roblox is growing because of how many games you can play. You have to understand that like when kids play your game, there are millions of other games they can play. If you can't retain them, or if they can't enjoy your game, they will click out and click another game. So that's also a thing to look after.
All right.
Yep.
I think we're out of time, but we can maybe wrap
Strongly
this up right
against it.
afterwards. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.